This video outlines knitting the tension swatch, which is an experimental swatch that explores various tension dial settings on the carriage to learn a little bit more about how the tension dial or stitch size settings impacts weight, drape, hand feel, stitch density, etc. We'll work this stitch over 50 needles from 25 left to 25 right. When working the E-wrap cast on, you must begin at the side of the selected needles opposite the carriage, as the working yarn will be wrapped towards the carriage side. With your main yarn weighted with a clothespin, place the yarn between needles 1 and 2 and wrap, forming a cursive E over needle 1, and bring the yarn up between needles 2 and 3 to wrap over needle 2. Continue this way across the selected needles. It's important not to draw these loops too tightly or it will make the first row of knitting extremely difficult. It's also important to make sure that the loops that you're forming are being held against the gate pegs or close to the machine and not formed in the hooks of the selected needles. After wrapping the last needle, insert the yarn into the yarn feeder. Ensure that the row counter is set to 0, 0, 0, and knit one row at tension 5. This row might be a little bit difficult to knit. Don't force the carriage if it jams. If it does, restart and re-E-wrap a little bit more loosely. Because there's no weight on the fabric that we're producing yet, we must knit back from holding position for the first several rows. When you're pulling needles forward to work, you must ensure that the knitting stays close to the gate pegs and does not come forward when drawing the needles into hold. The fabric must be able to slip between the gate pegs and the sinker plate close to the needle bed. You'll have to repeat this process for the first 5 rows until you've produced enough fabric to hold claw weights to weight your knitting. After you've knit about 5 rows back from hold, you should have made enough fabric to hang claw weights. Hang the claw weights about 1/2 inch away from the needles that are working so that the claw weights don't collide with the sinker plate of the carriage as you knit subsequent rows. After you've hung the claw weights, knit until the row counter reads 10. In this example, for me, it's an additional 5 rows. After these additional 5 rows, we'll form a series of eyelets that build in a record of the tension dial settings into the fabric. Using the single prong transfer tool, select needle 20 and move it 1 stitch to the right. Repeat this on every alternate needle to create 5 eyelets or 5 empty needles. When transferring, the needle that you're transferring to will now hold 2 loops or 2 stitches, and they will knit back from holding position and return to working position. The needles that are left empty must remain in working position and must not be pushed back to out of work or non-working position, or they will not form an eyelet. Knit 10 additional rows until the row counter reads 20. After completing these 10 rows, the first section of the tension swatch is complete. Remove the main yarn from the feeder and park it in the clip at the far edge of the bed. Pick up your contrasting color yarn, weight it with a clothespin. You can reuse the one that you started with, and feed it into the carriage. Knit 2 rows in contrasting color at the next tension dial setting up. So the first section was knit at 5, This next section will be knit at tension dial 6. Remove the contrasting color yarn, park it, and replace the main yarn into the feeder. Repeat all of the same steps as the first section that we knit at tension 5. Knit 10 rows at tension 6, form 6 eyelets by single transfer, knit another 10 rows before increasing the tension dial settings to 7 and knitting the contrast stripe and repeating this step again. Continue to follow this format for tension 6, 7, 8, and 9. When you're ready for the next contrast stripe, take note of what's happening to the contrasting color yarn because we haven't used it in 20 rows. When you place it into the feeder after parking the main yarn, it'll carry a float from its last used position up the side of the work, which is not usually ideal, but in this particular instance, we'll leave it. There are ways to manage these floats, often by cutting the yarn and weaving in tails later, but for this swatch, let floats form up the one side of the work. It'll be helpful to move your claw weights up periodically as the knitting tends to narrow, chiefly because it's curling in, as single jersey does, but also because when we're knitting at a tighter tension, the resulting fabric is much denser and narrower than it is as things widen or loosen up as the tension dial settings increase. Get in the habit of moving your claw weights up every 30 rows or so. After making the last contrast stripe, clip the yarn tail, leaving about 10 inches or so, and weave the yarn tail over and under the needles beginning from the tail's edge to automatically weave this end into the back of the knitting. After knitting the 20th row of the section knit at tension 9, knit one additional row at the largest stitch style possible. This is likely to be past 10. This will make the last loops or the last stitches much larger and help prevent the bind off edge from drawing inward. Use the latch tool to bind off loosely. This will be tricky at first, but with practice, you'll become a lot more efficient at binding off. There are separate videos for how to work this bind off, and in class, we've already done this once or twice already, but work slowly at a measured pace and make sure that you don't drop any stitches by trying to do this too quickly.